The young woman walked into the hall quietly, carrying her old instrument case close to her chest. She was not dressed in fine clothes, not wearing makeup, and not trying to draw attention. Most people did not even notice her at first. They were too busy chatting, laughing, and waiting for the program to begin. The hall was filled with noise, with chairs scraping on the floor, the sound of whispers, and the smell of food and coffee from the nearby tables. It was an ordinary evening, and the people thought nothing special would happen. But the young woman's steps were slow and careful. She looked nervous, her fingers gripping the handle of the case tightly. She was used to being overlooked, used to people thinking she was nothing special. Her hair was simple, her shoes worn, and her clothes plain. Some thought she was just another student who had been forced to perform. Nothing about her gave away the fire that was hidden deep inside her heart. She took a seat in the corner, waiting for her name to be called. Around her, other performers stood taller. Some looked confident, some whispered about how easy their pieces would be. A few even glanced at her with mild amusement. They judged her by her appearance, not knowing what she carried inside. No one asked her name. No one asked about her story. She was invisible in that room filled with voices and pride. The stage stood ready at the front of the hall, decorated with small flowers and a banner announcing the evening of performances. Families and friends were gathered to watch. Some had come only to cheer their children, others were curious to see if anyone would impress the judges. A few judges sat in a row, papers ready, pens in hand. They were prepared to mark down quick scores. The mood was not serious. People expected light entertainment, nothing more. When her name was called, the room grew a little quieter, but not out of respect. Rather from curiosity, a few whispered, "Who is she?" Others leaned slightly forward to see better. She rose from her seat, her hands shaking slightly. Her old case looked even older under the bright stage lights. The wood of the handle was worn, the corners scratched from years of travel and use. It was clear this was not a new instrument bought for show, but one that had lived through many years of practice and effort. As she walked toward the stage, she could feel dozens of eyes on her back. The weight of their judgment pressed heavily. She wanted to keep her head high, but her nerves made her bow slightly. Every step felt heavy. Her shoes tapped softly on the wooden floor, echoing through the hall. She climbed the small stairs to the stage, and for a moment she stood still, staring at the empty space before her. The hall, filled with strangers, now seemed larger and colder than ever. She set her case down carefully and opened it with trembling fingers. The soft click of the lock was almost too loud in the silence. Inside lay her instrument, shining faintly despite its age. She lifted it with care, as if it were the most precious thing in her life. And to her, it was. For years, it had been her only companion in the long nights, her only way to speak when words failed. Her music was her secret language, her quiet power. The judges gave her polite nods, but their eyes were half distracted. They expected a simple tune, nothing more. One judge even adjusted his glasses as if ready to write down average before she even began. A group of children in the back giggled softly, expecting to be bored. The air was filled with doubt. The young woman could feel it pressing on her like a heavy blanket. But inside her chest, her heart was beating fast, not from fear alone, but from something stronger. She had practiced for this moment in empty rooms on rainy nights, and when she had almost given up hope, every scar on her hands told a story of hours spent holding her instrument. Every sleepless night whispered. In her memory, she knew what people thought of her, but she also knew the truth that music could not be hidden. She closed her eyes for a moment, drawing in a deep breath. The noise of the hall faded, the whispers vanished, the weight of the crowd slipped away. It was only her and her instrument now. She remembered her small room at home, the peeling walls, the faint light of the lamp as she practiced alone. She remembered her parents, who had once believed in her before life became too hard. She remembered every time she was told she was not good enough, and how she answered only with music. And the stage, standing quietly, she seemed fragile, almost breakable, but in her silence something powerful was building. The audience did not see it yet. They only saw a nervous girl, plain and unremarkable, yet they were about to hear what she truly carried inside. Her fingers adjusted on the strings. Her posture straightened. She lifted her head slowly, her eyes no longer filled with fear but with determination. The moment stretched, the hall waiting. Some grew impatient, thinking it would be just another small performance. They had no idea how wrong they were. The young woman was about to change everything in that room. And it would all begin with a single note. The hall was not completely quiet when she stood on the stage. The whispers began again, soft at first, but soon spreading like a breeze through the crowd. People leaned toward one another, speaking in low voices. Some tried to hide their laughter. Behind their hands, they looked at the young woman holding her instrument and believed they already knew what kind of performance it would be. "She looks too nervous," one person whispered. "I don't think she can play well," another said. "She's just a simple girl, nothing special." The voices carried through the hall, even if she pretended not to hear them. Every doubt was like a sharp stone being thrown at her before she even began. The judges exchanged short glances. Their faces showed no excitement. They had seen many performers before, some talented, some average, and many forgettable. They thought she would be part of the last group. They expected she would play the required simple tune quickly, maybe make a mistake or two, and then quietly walk off the stage. They had already prepared themselves to mark the score without much thought. The instructions were clear. Play. Just a simple tune. Nothing complicated. Nothing too long. It was meant to test only the basics. No one expected emotion. No one expected surprise. The judges did not even sit forward in their chairs. They leaned back, pens ready, waiting for what they assumed would be another plain performance. In the back of the hall, a small group of children whispered to each other. "She looks scared," one of them said. "Maybe she will play badly." They laughed quietly, not out of cruelty, but out of childish habit. They did not know that their words carried through the air, adding to the wall of doubt pressing against her. Somewhere near the middle row, an older woman shook her head. She whispered to her friend, "She looks too ordinary. She doesn't have the presence of a real musician." Her friend nodded in agreement. "This will be quick," they said. Already their minds were closed. They had decided her value before she even touched the strings, and yet, despite the whispers, there were a few eyes watching with curiosity. A young boy in the front row leaned forward, his chin resting on his hands. He did not join the laughter. He only stared at her instrument, waiting to see what she would do. Another man sitting near the back stopped sipping his drink and focused on her. He had seen enough performers to know that sometimes the quiet ones carried secrets, but these rare few voices of curiosity were drowned by the louder tide of doubt. The young woman could hear it all, even if no one thought she could. The whispers pricked her ears. The faint chuckles pierced her heart. She could feel the heavy weight of low expectations pressing down on her shoulders. The hall full of people suddenly felt colder. She wanted to shut out their voices, but they slipped through, reminding her again and again that no one believed. In her fingers tightened on the instrument. She adjusted her grip not once, but twice. Her chest rose and fell with each careful breath. She told herself not to let their words break her focus. She had heard doubts before from neighbors, from classmates, even from her own relatives who once told her to give up music. But every time she chose to keep going, every time she answered not with words but with sound, tonight would be no different. The Tao. Judges cleared their throats softly, signaling that it was time to begin. One of them tapped the paper with his pen, impatiently waiting for her to play. The room grew just a little quieter. The whispers slowed but did not stop completely. Some leaned back, arms crossed, already prepared to be unimpressed. Others leaned forward just to confirm their expectations, and there she stood still and silent, holding her instrument with both hands. She could feel their doubts wrapping around her like chains, but in her heart, another voice whispered louder. The voice that came every time she touched her instrument. It told her that music was stronger than whispers, stronger than doubt, stronger than the judgments of strangers. Her eyes moved slowly across the hall. She saw the judges, serious and cold. She saw the audience, restless and doubtful. She saw the children giggling and the adults whispering. For a moment she felt small, as if she might disappear in front of them all. But then she remembered something. The nights when she played alone in her room, the sound filling the air, the way her heart felt lighter with every note. Music had always been her escape, her answer, her voice when words failed, ed. Crowd thought she would play just a simple tune, but inside her chest, she knew she was about to do something more. She had not walked into this hall to give them what they expected. She had walked in to show them what music truly meant to her. The whispers around her began to fade in her mind, not because they stopped, but because her heart was now beating louder than their words. The stage lights warmed her face. The air around her seemed still. The hall waited, though many thought they already knew the outcome. Her lips parted slightly as she took one last deep breath. Her fingers hovered, ready to touch the strings, ready to release everything she had carried inside. And though the people believed it would be nothing more than an ordinary, forgettable tune, they were seconds away from learning how wrong they were. She stood on the stage with her instrument in hand. The lights above her shone brightly, making her eyes blink. Her hands were trembling, and she could feel sweat forming on her palms. For a second, she thought her knees might give way. The silence in the hall was heavy, broken only by faint coughs or the sound of someone shifting in their chair. All eyes were fixed on her, and the weight of that attention made her chest feel tight. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the faces, the whispers, and the doubt that surrounded her. She remembered the words of the judges. Just a simple tune. They expected nothing more, but in her heart she knew she had carried too much music, too many emotions to simply play without meaning. She took a deep breath, slow and steady, trying to calm her shaking hands. The sound of her own breath echoed in her ears, grounding her in that moment. Memories rushed into her mind. Memories of long nights practicing in her small room, when the world outside seemed cruel and unfair. She thought of the hours when her fingers ached from endless practice, but she kept playing anyway because it was the only way she felt alive. She remembered when her neighbors told her to stop making noise, when classmates laughed at her for carrying around an old, scratched instrument instead of something new. She remembered when her own family doubted if music could ever give her a future. All those moments built inside her like a storm. And now, standing here, she knew this was her chance to let it all out. The crowd might not care. The judges might already have decided her worth, but the music inside her was too strong to be hidden. She gripped her instrument tighter, her heartbeat steadying as her focus sharpened. The hall waited. Some grew restless, tapping their feet or folding their arms, thinking she was wasting time, but she was not stalling. She was preparing, drawing strength from everything that had shaped her journey. Her silence was not weakness. It was the deep breath before a leap. She thought of the one person who once told her never to give up, an old teacher who had believed in her when no one else did. That teacher's voice whispered in her memory. Music is not in your fingers. It is in your heart. Let them hear your heart. The thought gave her courage. She opened her eyes, and though her hand still trembled slightly, her gaze was steady. Her fingers moved into place, resting gently against the strings. She could feel the familiar texture, worn smooth from years of practice. She tilted her head slightly, listening to the silence before the sound. The first note was waiting to be born. It was there, in her fingertips, in her chest, in her very soul. She took another deep breath, this one deeper than the rest, and with it, she pushed away the fear. The whispers in the hall faded, the doubtful faces blurred in her vision. She no longer saw the judges, the audience, or the children who had giggled at her earlier. In her mind, she was back in her room, alone, with only the soft glow of a lamp and the comfort of her music. In that small memory she found strength. She remembered how the music carried her through lonely nights, how it gave her hope when life felt heavy, how it told stories she could never put into words. Tonight, she would tell her story not with speeches but with sound. She would let the music show them who she was. Her chest rose and fell once more, her breath steady now. The trembling in her fingers began to ease, replaced by a quiet certainty. She was no longer the nervous girl they saw standing on stage. She was an artist preparing to share her soul. The room held its breath, waiting for her to begin. The moment stretched long, as if time itself was pausing to see what she would do. Some people grew impatient, but they did not know that this silence was her strength. Every second was her way of gathering the courage to transform the air into music. Finally, she pressed her fingers to the strings. Her body leaned slightly forward, her face calm but determined. The storm inside her was ready to break free. The first note would not just be a sound, it would be the doorway to everything she had held back. And as the hall sat waiting, unaware of the power about to be released, she lifted her hand, ready to strike the very first note. A note that would silence every whisper, shake every doubt, and begin a performance no one in that room would ever forget. The first note escaped from her instrument, soft yet sharp, like a whisper that could cut through stone. It floated into the air and seemed to touch every corner of the hall. The crowd, which had been restless a moment ago, suddenly stilled. Even the children in the back who had been giggling leaned forward, surprised by the sound. It was not just a simple note. It carried weight. It carried emotion. It carried something no one expected. Her hands moved slowly at first, each stroke careful, each note flowing into the next. The tune that the judges had asked her to play was meant to be simple, basic, almost mechanical. But as soon as she began, it was clear that she had no intention of playing it plainly. She was weaving something richer, deeper. She added small flourishes, tiny touches of her own. Every sound seemed to rise and fall with the beating of her heart. The hall grew quieter with each passing second. People stopped whispering, stopped moving. Some even held their breath as if afraid that any noise would break the spell. The judges, who had leaned back casually with pens ready, now sat forward. Their eyes narrowed, their hands frozen above their papers. They were hearing something far beyond the test they had designed. The girl's eyes were half closed, her face calm but filled with emotion. She was no longer aware of the crowd, no longer aware of the judges. For her, the hall had vanished. She was back in the places that had shaped her, back in the lonely nights when she had played just to keep her heart from breaking. Each note carried those memories, those emotions. She poured them into the music, turning a simple tune into a story. The melody rose higher, flowing like a river breaking free from its banks. Then it softened, gentle as the whisper of wind through trees. The audience followed every shift, their hearts rising and falling with the sound. Some closed their eyes, letting the music carry them away. Others stared at her in awe, unable to believe that someone so quiet, so plain, could hold such power. It was not just skill that they were hearing. It was honesty. It was truth. Her music was not polished perfection. It was raw emotion, and that was why it reached into people's hearts. Some listeners felt a lump in their throat. Some felt their eyes sting with tears. They did not understand why a simple tune was moving them so deeply, but they could not deny it. One judge shifted uncomfortably, trying to keep his expression neutral, but the corners of his mouth twitched as if fighting to smile. Another judge tapped his pen against the table, not out of impatience but in rhythm with the music. The third judge simply stared, forgetting to write anything at all. Her hands moved faster now, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm. The hall seemed alive with her sound. The wooden walls vibrated softly. The air seemed to shimmer. People felt as though they were part of something bigger, as though the music was not being played to them but through them. She gave herself completely to the performance, and in return, the audience gave their silence, their attention, their hearts. The melody shifted again, darker now, heavier. The sound carried pain, loss, and struggle. It told of nights when she had wanted to quit, of days when she felt invisible, of times when life had been cruel. The audience felt it, and many lowered their eyes, touched by emotions they had not expected to face. It was not just her story anymore. It became their own memories, their own struggles reflected back through the sound, and then slowly, the darkness in the tune lifted. The notes grew lighter, brighter, each one a step out of the shadows, each one a reminder that hope always survived. Her playing was no longer just about pain, but about overcoming it, about standing strong. The crowd could feel the change. They sat taller, their eyes brighter, carried upward by her rising melody. The children in the back who had doubted her now sat with open mouths, their earlier laughter forgotten. The older woman in the middle row, who had dismissed her as too ordinary, now clutched her chest as tears rolled down her face. The man in the back leaned forward, nodding slowly, as if confirming to himself that his guess had been right. That this girl carried something rare. The simple tune was gone, transformed into something no one could have imagined. It was no longer an exercise, it was no longer just music, it was a journey, a confession, a declaration of who she was. And every person in that hall, from the youngest child to the oldest judge, was caught in it, unable to turn away. Her bow, moved one last time across the strings in that section of the melody, was now united in silence and awe. The girl who had walked in unnoticed was now commanding the entire room without saying a single word. Her notes rose higher, fierce and bright. They felt like fire, like lightning, like a storm that swept everyone up, and then they fell again, soft and tender, like a gentle touch, like a whisper of love. The shifts were so sudden yet so perfect that the crowd's hearts moved with her every change. They could not stop it. They did not want to stop it. It was as if the hall itself had changed shape. The walls seemed closer. The ceiling seemed taller. The sound had stretched the space, turned it into something greater. People would never remember this place as just a hall again. They would remember it as the place where they witnessed something extraordinary. Shock turned into respect. Respect turned into admiration. Admiration turned into love. They were not just listening to a performance, they were living inside it. And when the final part of her playing in that moment reached its peak, the room seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see where she would take them next. She had walked in carrying an old case, ignored, doubted, even laughed at. But now, on this stage, she stood tall without even realizing it. Her music had stripped away every wall, every doubt, every judgment. She had transformed herself in their eyes. She had transformed them too. And the shocked faces staring back at her were proof of it. And though the performance was not finished yet, everyone knew one thing already. This was not a girl playing a simple tune. This was an artist who had changed the room forever. Her hands moved gently as the last part of the melody reached its end. The strings gave out one final pure note that hung in the air like a fragile bird. The sound floated through the hall and seemed to stay alive even after her bow had stopped. For a moment, no one in the audience moved. No one clapped. No one even breathed loudly. It was not the silence of boredom. It was the silence of wonder. A silence so deep that everyone wanted to hold on to it for just a little longer. The young woman slowly lowered her instrument. Her chest rose and fell, her breathing heavy. She had given everything to the music. Every emotion she had kept locked inside for years had poured out through her fingers. She was tired, but not weak. She felt lighter, as if the burden she had carried on her shoulders had finally been lifted. Her eyes opened slowly and she looked out into the hall. The faces staring back at her were not the same faces she had seen before. Where there had once been doubt, now there was awe. Where there had once been whispers of judgment, now there was silence filled with respect. The crowd looked at her not as a plain girl in worn clothes, but as someone who had touched their souls. Their eyes were wide, their mouths slightly open. Some blinked rapidly, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Some had tears running down their cheeks and did not even bother to wipe them away. The judges, who had come prepared to hear only an exercise, could not hide their emotions either. The first judge's eyes glistened as he stared at her, unable to find the words. The second judge leaned back in his chair, shaking his head in disbelief as if asking himself how such beauty had come from a girl no one expected. The third judge, the harshest one, had his lips pressed tightly together, but his face was soft, his eyes wet. He tried to remain composed, but the truth was written clearly across his expression. He had been moved. Deeply, for a long breath, the hall remained frozen. The final note still lived in the hearts of the people. They did not want to let it go. They were afraid that clapping would break the magic, afraid that any noise would steal away the fragile beauty she had given them. And then, almost like a wave, it began. One pair of hands clapping softly, then another, then another. until the hall erupted into thunder. The sound of applause shook the walls. It was wild, it was desperate, it was the only way the people could release what they were feeling. They rose from their seats one by one until the entire hall was standing, a roaring sea of respect and love. Some clapped with their hands raised high, some stamped their feet, others shouted words of praise. The children jumped from their seats, cheering loudly. The older woman who had doubted her the most now clapped with tears running freely, whispering to herself, "I was wrong." The young woman stood on stage, her face lit with surprise. She had never expected this, never imagined such a reaction. She had only wanted to play, to share her truth. She had not thought of applause or recognition, and now here it was, more than she could ever have dreamed. The noise of the crowd filled her ears, but her heart heard something louder: acceptance, respect, and love. She bowed her head slightly, her hands trembling as she held her instrument close. It was not pride that she felt. It was gratitude. Gratitude that her music had reached them, that it had spoken when words never could. She looked at the judges and saw them nodding, some still unable to clap because their hands held pens, but their eyes told her everything she needed to know. They had not expected her, but she had left them speechless. In the back of the hall, two strangers looked at each other and smiled, though they had never met before. The music had made them feel the same thing, united them in a shared moment. A child tugged at his mother's sleeve and whispered, "I want to play like her one day." The mother kissed the child's forehead and smiled through her tears. The girl on stage had inspired more than respect. She had planted seeds of hope. The applause did not stop quickly. It rolled on, wave after wave, as if the people were afraid of letting her go. They wanted her to know how much she had given them. They wanted her to feel the power of what she had done. For the first time in her life, she was not invisible. She was not ordinary. She was not the nervous girl carrying an old case. She was the one who had transformed a simple tune into something unforgettable. Her eyes filled with tears, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of release, of joy, of relief. She looked out at the crowd and saw not strangers, but hearts she had touched. She felt as though she was standing not on a stage but inside a dream where music truly had the power to change the world. The final note still lingered inside the people even as they clapped and cheered. It would not leave them soon. It had carved itself into their memories. They would remember this night, remember this girl, remember how they felt when the room turned silent and the world became nothing but her music. And as she stood there, bowing shyly, her cheeks flushed with emotion, she knew something had changed forever. Not only for the audience, not only for the judges, but for herself. She had faced their doubts, she had faced her fears, and she had conquered them all with the only weapon she had, her music. That final note was gone from the strings, but it lived in every single person who had heard it, and none of them, not one, would ever forget.